അവിടുന്ന് വൈകുന്നേരം പെട്ടെന്ന് എന്നെ അവർ 15 കിലോമീറ്റർ
Hey everyone, it's Sam, and welcome back to the 911 Nonsense podcast. To stay in the loop, learn about upcoming guests, and join in the conversations with the Noon community, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And hey, if you like what you hear in this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means the world to us. In this episode of Noon, we're excited to introduce Ian, a physician who's risen from EMT to medical director of a major EMS system. Ian's journey through medical school and into leadership is a testament to his dedication to patient care and his relentless advocacy for EMS professionals. Join us as we dive into his story and discuss what it takes to support and elevate our EMS community. Let's get started. All right, Ian, thank you so much for joining us on the Noon podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited. We've known each other for quite a few years now.
Yep.
I didn't know you before you were a doctor, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. Can I go ahead and get an introduction?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ian Maduro. I'm an emergency medicine physician, also board certified EMS physician. I started my career somewhere where I was around 19 years old. It's getting kind of hard to remember now because I think this year I was thinking about it before we came on, and it's 28 years in emergency medicine slash EMS. And so I started very young, where I worked, ambulance, local ambulance here in Albuquerque. I then became an emergency ER tech. And then from there, I moved on to working some rural services and on one of the Pueblo EMS agencies as well. Eventually then made my way to fire service, where I was a fire medic for a few years. And then during that time, I got on with a flight service with the local university flight program. And I was there before I went to medical school. And then I did med school from '06 to 10, residency in lovely, picturesque Hartford, Connecticut. If you've never been, it's okay. You're not missing much. But again, like a big knife and gun club, trauma service or trauma center for residency. I finished that in 13, and then I did my fellowship at Yale from 13 to 14, and then stayed on as faculty there. My wife at the time also went into emergency medicine after switching from general surgery. So even though we have the same number of years in, because we did medical school together and then went to residency, matched in residency together, she had done a couple of years of surgery, and then switched over to emergency medicine. So we came back in 2016, and then I became the medical director for the largest nonprofit ambulance service in New Mexico that covers the Albuquerque, Bernalillo County area. So I've been doing that now for the last 8 years. And then I also work with the EMS Fellowship. So I'm a volunteer essentially, but faculty for the EMS consortium. But I work very heavily with them, with the fellows. And then I'm also, if I don't have enough jobs to do, I'm also a PRN at the university as well. So I work at 2 emergency department hospital systems, plus the ambulance service. So yeah, I keep myself pretty busy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. You're very well-rounded.
Yeah.
So was becoming a doctor kind of the ultimate goal from the beginning, or is that something you just kind of stumbled into?
Yeah. So that actually is going to show my age. All right. I'm 47. Okay. So let's just get it
Okay.
out there. But so I came up in grew up as a kid in the '80s, high school in the '90s. Um, but I wanted to be a physician right after I saw the first open heart surgery on television in the '80s. So I think it was like 7 or 8 years old. And this was the first time they'd ever shown cardiac surgery live on television. I was just amazed by it. I remember my parents walking off kind of green in the face, but I was fascinated with it. And so most of my life, I wanted to be a physician. I got into college, and I really didn't do well in the beginning. I
Hmm.
had taken too many classes. I was in the marching band, and it's okay. I was cool. I was in the drum line, so we're good.
That's what they all say.
That's what they all say. Yeah. So, but the drum line was always the rock stars of the band. Let's face it. So,
It's true.
it was better than the piccolo line, that's for sure. So, um, the I wasn't doing well, and I was really kind of stumbling, and I was like, I don't know if I can make it, and I was really not sure where I was going to go. And then I remember taking an EMT basic course down in Johnson Gym in the basement with Cy Stockoff, the great Cy Stockoff, and anyone here in the local area knows Cy. And I was hooked. And I took the basic course. At the time, I was too young to apply for the 911 ambulance service here in town. You had to be 21 years old to work there. So I
Hmm.
started working for another one, but I would ride with AAS. I mean, I rode with Sean Robertson. I used to try to ride with him all the time. I remember I thought Mike Levine was the coolest guy I'd ever. He was so cool under pressure, right?
Mike Levine's amazing. Yeah.
He was so cool under pressure, and he'd bring in these patients that were just absolute train wrecks, and he just was like, "Yep, here's what's going on. This is what I got." And I wanted to be Mike Levine, and I told him that right before he retired. I was like, "Dude, I used to look up to you so much." Sean Robertson had the biggest heart I've ever worked with, right? And so that's where that started. And so then I went to school. I went to paramedic school. And I remember I was in paramedic school, and my instructor was a guy named Larry Cobb, who I absolutely loved to death. He was the best instructor. And Larry, I remember talking to him one day about it. And I said, I don't know if I keep going as a paramedic or do I go to medical school so I can keep advocating for EMS. And he said, well, you're going to have to come up with that on your own one day. And I remember I was working in the fire department. Not that there was anything wrong with it. I was enjoying what I was doing, but I remember thinking to myself, when I'm an old man retired, can I look back on my life and say that I did everything that I set out to accomplish? And when the answer was no, I knew that I had to keep moving. And I still remember it's not the only reason, but my all-time favorite band ever is Rush. And there's a line in Subdivisions, which it's not. This is not what the song is about. The song is about defected youth growing up in suburbia. But there's a line in it where Geddy Lee says, "Well, some may sell their dreams for small desires," and that always just hit hard with me that, don't give up on what you really ultimately want to do because in the end, it may not be, go for what you really want to do. And if that's what your passion is, if that's where your heart is, go for it. And so I knew, and I was in the fire department and I kept going to school. I was working 4896s, um, and still going to chemistry, organic chemistry, physics. Eventually, I had to move away from that, and I started flying because when I went to the flight service, they're like, "Oh yeah, we can help you. Weekend nights, baby." So I worked weekend nights, then got into medical school and went on from there. So it has always been a part of where I wanted to be, but in that, I found EMS and a love for it to that this day. I just love it. I don't know how else to say it. There's times where the crews are going out on the street and I want to be on that truck so bad my teeth hurt. It's like I just want to be out there on the street with them. But I know that I can't be there like that every day,
No.
because the guideline that I'm writing, the meeting that I go to that helps make the system better means that their life is better on the streets. The care that they provide on the streets is better. And what better way to advocate for my patients? Hundreds of them a day, thousands of them a week, hundreds of thousands a year, in the system. And if I can make it a little bit better by the care that I can help the paramedics practice, the equipment we can provide them, then I'm doing the best work I can. You know?
Yeah, that's awesome. You had mentioned that you and your wife went to medical school at the same time. Were you guys married before med school, or did you meet in that process?
No, we met. No, we met years before that in undergrad in a public speaking course. So I'm sure you
Oh.
can tell. I stumbled in it. They were like, "You never say anything. You're really quiet."
I'm sure.
Yeah, no, that's where we met. And we were friends for about a year before that, and then after we had started dating. So we actually finished undergrad together, and then we couples essentially got into residence or medical school together, and then couples matched into residency. So we went through all of that together.
So do you think it was easier or harder having two people in at the same time?
So, I had friends in med school who were like super competitive, and they were like, "Oh, I could never go to school with my spouse."
Yeah.
Right? I'm too competitive. Like I'd always want to know what their grades were. I was never that way. To me, we've always been best of friends and teammates. Like, why would I be angry that she got a better grade than me? Like, I'm happy that she got a better grade than I did, or that she did better, but maybe I can learn something from her, and I need to pay attention to what she's doing. So no, I mean, I actually, the first 2 years we were together every day,
Yeah.
for those first couple of years and we actually really enjoyed it. When we got to the third year, when you start doing your clerkship, and you're going to all the different rotations, we were both saying to ourselves, man, this is gonna be weird, we're not going to see each other every day now. And
Yeah.
but no, I had a blast with it. I thought it was an excellent experience with her, and I didn't find it to be hard at all. I actually found it to be an instant source of support, whether it be, just studying or stress.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah, worked out nice.
So I think you made it pretty obvious that, your whole goal is to make it easier. You're advocating for EMS, but ultimately advocating for the patients and the community that we serve. But how do you think that going to med school has benefited your community?
Well, it's because so I also chose emergency medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm still actively working as an emergency medicine physician, so I'm there. I see the patients at two separate hospitals. One is a community nonprofit organization that sees almost as many patients as the university sees, and I get that experience of both working with residents, and I get the experience of my own clinical practice. So by going to medical school, what that gave me, and then that training in my EMS fellowship, it gives me that connection, right? I've been there on the streets. I know what that's like. You can't bullshit a bullshitter, right?
No.
So like I know the games. I know because I probably played to myself. I got in trouble a few times here and there, for maybe don't necessarily need to get into some of the pranks we played back in the day.
Oh, come on.
Oh man. Yeah. I had a couple of good ones over the years. I still think my favorite one was when we dumped a bucket of water on a guy from standing on the roof after shift. But to be fair, he put defib gel on our windows.
Oh, that's not nice.
Well, defib gel doesn't come off the windows with water.
It does
And
not.
then it started raining. So I turn on my windshield wipers, and it's pouring buckets. We got a flight crew in the back of the truck with us, and I can't see out the window. So I got him back. We got him back.
Do you think that working in the ER and working as a medical director helps you implement more evidence-based guidelines? I will say that the first year you actually came in and that I met you, we had a medical director that was very like anti Zofran, because Zofran was coming in to be this like really
Yeah.
huge thing and super beneficial, and we could not get it approved in that first year you came in. I swear it was probably the first 6 months you got Zofran in right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I use a variety of sources when we build guidelines. So we're actually right in guideline season right now.
Mm-hmm.
My colleague with my two colleagues with the fire department, both fellows who came up through the EMS consortium, and is honestly, it's always cool to see the fellows move on and get their jobs, right? It's like
I
that's the whole
agree.
point of the fellowship, is getting that job. And then for the one with City Fire, we work very, very closely together. And this is that time of year where we're working, it's we all call for guidelines. We want to hear from the crews, one, where we made mistakes, because there's always mistakes that we find, links that are
Mm-hmm.
broken, all that stuff, grammar, blah blah blah. That's the grind stuff that has to be done. But this is, yeah, it's all about that, as much as we can, evidence-based medicine. And does it fit, right? So I've also moved very heavily into the realm of quality improvement. I work with our national organization for EMS physicians, NAMSP, and I'm on the quality and safety committee. I also help teach the 2-day fellow course, and teach the year-long course. and then mentor for the year-long course as well for projects. So quality improvement is a big part of my life now, and it's also that, like, what are we doing to make the system better? Like, we're functioning at level A and we want to be at level B, right? Like, how do we improve on that? And so a large part of that is then how do we do that in the guidelines as well, right? So yeah, absolutely. I keep up to date as best I can. I listen to emergency medicine podcasts. I listen to like most up to date papers as I can get. A lot of those then will translate over into what we do in the pre-hospital world as well. And then you got to be a critical appraisal of that, and then come together as a group and say, is this where we need to move forward with? Right? It's like, okay, great. A retrospective study came out that says that there's a close association between this type of practice and patient outcome. But does that mean we're really going to implement that versus we have a randomized control trial that says that this is the better, that this is the better care, and then how do you want to implement that? Because something that a year ago was hot, yeah, this is what we got to do, and then 2 years later, all the RCTs come out, or some review comes out, and it's like actually it wasn't, and now you got to move that needle back on the guideline. So you always, you want to bring out stuff that is sustainable, especially in as large a system as we have, right? When you have over 2,000 EMTs and paramedics, you want to make sure that when you put something out, you don't have to retract it back, because that is moving a big ship with a small rudder. And you got to be real careful about implementing things that are hot that may not necessarily wind up working in the end. And then if you got to walk that back, then you got to explain it, or when you adjust it. And not necessarily that it isn't a bad thing. I mean, I tell people all the time, this is the practice of medicine. We're always going to find new things, something that we thought absolutely, I mean, like cooling,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's been so many papers on post-ROS cooling, and that was the thing. This is what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yet another paper has just come out that says, it's not really helping. Oh, then how many Arctic Suns are the hospital systems carrying now? Because there was all these RCTs, and then when you really pull the aggregate data together, I mean, don't even get me started on TPA and the NINS trials back in the day. That there's still a lot of controversy about when it comes to its effectiveness in at least immediate effectiveness in stroke outcomes, right?
Yes.
But yet here we are with certain practices that we're not moving away from. I mean, backboards for decades,
Oh, I know.
decades, and there was never, ever evidence for backboards. That day came out of the 70s, and then you took decades to get papers out that showed that they really were ineffective, right? So, but again, yes, all of this comes into really looking carefully at what that is, looking at standards and practices across the country. Where can we advance that practice? Like right now, we're about to start in the city and the county our buprenorphine project,
Oh,
which is huge. Right? But there's a great evidence that shows that early buprenorphine reduces morbidity and mortality. And so this has been a huge project led by one of my colleagues that we're a part of, and that is going to be implemented very soon. So, that's the other side of it, is bringing out projects like that, advancing the medications that we use, using new pieces of equipment, but also programs like this that merge across emergency medicine, EMS, and public health and public safety. So, yeah.
yeah. No, that's fantastic. Another huge one right now, too, that I think they're trying to slap people about is rebound hypothermia. When you have people who are too hot and you have providers who are afraid to cool that patient down, right? Because now they don't want to cool them down too fast or too much. When they're saying that this high temperature of 104, 105 is going to start killing
Yeah.
brain cells, right? But and they're just saying cool them down as fast as you can. It doesn't matter. Cool them down. We'll do what we need to do after, but get them as cold as you can. Ice packs everywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, right now TNK and TPA, right? That's a big one in the stroke world,
Yeah.
looking back again at sequential defibrillation. When that first popped up in 2016, 2017, it was a hot rage thing, but there was no data for it at the time.
No.
Now there is, all right? So yeah, that's a perfect example of when we first started that, or there was, like some push for that way back about 7, 8 years ago on that. It was, this is the hot new thing, but where's like, okay, but what do we have that says that this is working, right?
Yeah.
Now there's actually some data that has come out that says that in very specific select cases of, like refractory VFib, that is an option that may lead to, that has better outcomes, right? Okay, so now it's time to start critically looking at that data and saying, all right, is this something we put in the guideline now, right? So,
Sure.
yeah, it's the ebb and flow, and sometimes we get it right, and sometimes you may hold off on putting something in just to kind of see how the data rolls out with it over as the years go on. And even though we may not necessarily be an early, yeah, because sometimes you're an early adopter to something that doesn't really pan out. Other times you wind up not being an early adopter to something that does pan out. But as long as you're following at least the standards of practice across the board, you're fine. But it is nice to be able to advance that. And with the team that I work with, everybody is emergency medicine. Most of them are EMS physicians. So when we have these conversations, it's nice to have a very robust conversation about what we think the literature is showing and what's going to work best for our system, because every system's built a little differently as well, right? So is this really going to be applicable? Can we do this given the strengths and limits of the system design that you're in? So that has a critical component.
Yeah. Do you ever have problems where, like, you have paramedics or EMTs specifically that are unwilling to roll with the changes that you guys are putting out?
Not much, actually. Usually they're bringing stuff to us. I've got a list of suggestions from the last couple of days. Interestingly, a lot of them are very similar to things that I already want to do, which is nice. So we're kind of in sync with that.
That's good.
Um, I think the old, when I started in the 90s, you had paramedics and EMTs that were like, this is how I learned 10 years ago, and this is the way it stays, right? But as paramedicine has stands now more shoulder to shoulder with their medical colleagues, right? Where it is, you know, um, you can argue the positives and negatives of a bachelor's of science program. I was one of the first to go through it. I still think, and I can't 100% guarantee this, but I'm pretty sure I was the first bachelor's of science of EMS to go to medical school in 2006. I always went back and looked on the board of like all the graduates to see if I recognized anyone before me that got it. And I didn't see anybody. So I can't say 100%, but I'm reasonably sure I was. So I'm a big believer in education and advanced education for paramedics, 100%.
Sure.
I think and as we publish more research, right, we stand shoulder to shoulder academically with our peers. Um, and that attitude I don't see anymore, right? It's what is new, what can we do, how do we expand, how do we provide that? And when new practice rolls down, I don't really see a lot of pushback on it. And I think that has been a very positive change in the outlook
Mm-hmm.
in pre-hospital medicine over the last 20 years or so. And I think that is born from more formal education and kind of a mind shift of that's okay. And I don't see much of that anymore. I mean, everybody grumbles about having to do their CEs, so do I, but I think though it has certainly led to it's because it's just you got to get it done, right? So,
Yeah.
but what I don't see is a resistance to change in practice, which I think is a really good thing, right? And
That
so
is a really
very
good
rarely
thing.
do I see anybody argue, why are we doing this? What I usually get is, well, why didn't you guys put that in? And I was like, well, because maybe we aren't quite there yet for that. And I mean, for example, like, we instituted like just in the last year, we've done a special skill for droperidol across both fire departments and our ambulance service, the special skill for droperidol, and then the other one for buprenorphine, right? I mean, we're at a point now in our system, and I was saying this the other day, 20, 30 years ago, these organizations didn't get along quite like this, like we do now. But now we
Yeah.
have leadership in all three organizations. We have medical direction in all three organizations that I mean, how cool is that? That we're doing the NAMSP National Airway Project together. All three programs are working together. How cool is it that we're at that point in our system where everyone is, working so closely together that we can do projects like that? So I think this is actually a very exciting time in emergency and in EMS. Despite the other challenges that we have, what you do see is an advancement in practice that you're seeing in all sides of the spectrum of it, which is just amazing.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Have you guys considered Precedex at all?
For my critical care team, yes, that we've definitely discussed. On the 911 side of things, not so much. We carry some other meds that I think are just as effective, at least is in the city, right? So
Mhm.
and you're a critical care flight, so sometimes with the time set up for Precedex, and its use mostly in the ICU. I rarely use it in the emergency department. What I need is my crews to be able to keep somebody comfortable and asleep without pain if they've been intubated, right? And so, fentanyl, Versed, and then we carry ketamine for that as well. With those three in our area, anything in the surrounding, hospital systems coming into any of the major tertiary or quaternary system, that's good enough for it. But maybe if I did, I would probably put it in as more of like a special skill for like transfer. That I don't have any
Mhm.
problem with. Like if somebody starts it and they keep it going, totally fine. But to actually initiate, I don't know if it's necessarily there for the 911 system on at least on like 911 calls itself.
Sure. No, I think, well, in the instances that I've seen it used in psychiatric care, I think has been phenomenal. But the three medications that you described, the Versed, ketamine, and fentanyl, are all great, and given in the right doses, can affect some really awesome patient care. I actually can't, I don't even remember what we were talking about yesterday, but we came up with a term, verphentamine,
Nice.
for the mix of all three. Yeah, I wish I could remember. Have you seen that AI image that's floating around right now on a lot of the EMS pages and nurse pages of it's what AI thinks a code looks like?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah,
You have one person doing CPR on the chest, and then you have another person doing CPR on the person's crotch, and you're like, what's going on here?
that's pretty funny.
It just makes you wonder, like, are we checking for pulses? What are we doing there?
I came up with my own kind of little cocktail in the emergency department for like certain kinds of like cyclic vomiting and abdominal pain.
Hmm.
I do low dose droperidol with low dose ketamine
Oh,
combination, like for say the example like cyclic vomiting from marijuana use or just people who have chronic, cyclic vomiting syndrome. And God, I'm so glad droperidol is back. It's such an amazing drug. So I'll do low dose of that with no more than 10 of ketamine because it's strictly for pain control ketamine.
yeah.
Oh my God, it works so well. I admitted a patient one day, and they wound up with other issues, but the internal medicine doc calls down to like, hey, tell me about this droperidol and ketamine. I was like, oh yeah, it worked like a charm. It's fantastic. And she goes, this is amazing. I'll have to try it sometime. I was like, yeah, I call it the Maduro cocktail. So,
A Toro
but
cocktail.
that's in hospital. Okay. So
Yeah,
for anyone who's
only.
later listening to this, that's any of my crews. No, we are not doing that on the streets. Okay. Thank you. But so that's something I was just, and again, it's just getting people comfortable and feeling better. And, the narcotics aren't always going to hit that for them. So yeah, but it worked really well. So I'm trademarking that one.
You're gonna trademark it. That's funny. Has there been any point in your career where you thought you couldn't handle it or you might quit because of something that you saw or something that happened to you?
Yeah. So I tell my crews about this when they first in orientation. I want people to understand and know that this is an amazing career, but it is a hard career. And I tell the crews all the time, anyone who does emergency medicine for any period of time, it leaves scars. whether physical or emotional or both. You can't get through a career in this job field, specifically emergency medicine, where you don't see something that just hurts. And it doesn't always have to be some really gory situation. For me, the ones that have hit hardest are the ones where I feel like we could have done something and the system failed. And that's where it hurts the most, is when you are where you're like, you could have done something and it feels like that, but it didn't happen that way. So, I mean, 20 years, 20 plus years, I've been on a ton of pre-hospital codes, a ton of codes in the emergency department over the years. Um, and sometimes they just hurt,
Mm-hmm.
they just stick with you. Um, it's not like I have dreams about it or anything like that, but just I'll see something or I'll hear something and I'll just be sad for a moment. Just like I'll remember that person and remember the events and how things didn't really pan out the way that I would hope that they would have. For the one for me, and this one's still hard for me to talk about, but I talk about it because I have to. Because I want people to understand, like you'll have moments where you see people do the most amazing things for each other in this
Mm-hmm.
business, in this world, and truly help each other. And then you will see people do the most absolutely god awful, disgusting things to another person that you didn't know. Like, you talk about reality is stranger than fiction. It's kind of also why I don't watch a lot of horror movies. Like, I don't need to see that this world's already does enough bad stuff to each other, But this one wasn't that. This was late 2020.
Still fairly recent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This was the first time where I actually said, I don't know if I can come back. And so we had gone through that first major heavy COVID wave, and things had come back up like during that summer. We had actually gone on vacation. We were allowed to go on vacation. It was the first time we'd actually gone out because a friend of mine had a place in Maui, and it was the first time we'd have gone out there. We had a great time. And then as we're coming back at the end of that year or at the end of that summer, they're like, oh, second wave is coming in. And that wasn't the big deal. This was in 2020 when all of a sudden people started shifting and moving all over the place, and we lost a ton of staff. Nursing was moving out and going to other locations. And you started seeing people either just leaving or going to other opportunities, and the staffing dropped huge in this emergency department I was working at. And now, I remember walking in, there's like 60 plus in the waiting room. You had people, ICU level patients in the waiting room with ICU level care started for them sitting in a chair, right? This is when we saw the shift in emergency medicine to waiting room care, and it's still there and it still hasn't gone away. And we'd never done that before, right? It was like, no, you're in the waiting room. But as only emergency medicine people can do, it's like we can't just leave them like that. We got to go see them. We got to figure this out. I mean, I remember walking into one of the other EDs, smaller EDs in the system, and I went and saw this patient who had been sitting there for like 15 hours in the triage bay and was sick. And we're at that point I had to transfer him to a larger hospital with an ICU, and this was just the norm. And on this particular case, I still remember he was, I don't know, maybe 60s-year-old gentleman who had been in the waiting room 9 hours. And I went to go see him. And he was sick. And it wasn't anything, anything out of the ordinary, right? This wasn't some god awful trauma. This wasn't a pediatric thing. This wasn't a pregnancy, just sick old guy. He wasn't the nicest guy either, to be quite frank. I mean, hey, you know how it is, man. Not every day is a great day in your job. Not every interaction with everyone is this wonderful, amazing experience. Let's call it for what it really is. People sometimes annoy you or aggravate you, or you aggravate them, or you come in with your trauma and your baggage, and you say something, and you're off on the wrong foot. It's just being human. It's the nature
Mm-hmm.
of this. And when you see as much daily how many patients we see, it just happens, right? But anyway, again, classic kind of big mustache that's got the staining from the cigarettes. You can see the stains on his fingers, and he was pretty sick. I thought this was maybe like an aortic dissection, so I sent him to the CT scanner. We all know what happens when you send your sick patients to the CT scanner. And unfortunately, he coded, right? So he comes back in with the code, and unfortunately, he does not survive the event. And I don't know what it was, but I stopped for a moment, and I was really upset, and I went outside for a minute, took a breath, and the charge nurse I was working with, awesome guy, he and I were good friends, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, I can't keep doing this like this." And I called Mandy, and I said, I don't know if I can do this anymore like this. And the rest of that shift was hard because I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and they were talking about, sometimes the care that people deserve, but they don't get, and fighting for the advocacy of your patients. But when I've got 15 other people that I still need to go round on, and I've got 40, 50 people in the waiting room, I don't have time to stop and reflect.
Yeah.
You know, I appreciate the purple candles, but I got to keep moving.
Yeah.
And I get it. I understand it because we're supposed to take that moment, but that moment that I'm taking means that somebody else isn't being seen.
Yeah, you're
It's not
taking
that
from
I'm
somebody else's
here.
moment. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Right. It's not, I need to sacrifice my moment to make sure that that other person's moment is more, is acknowledged and taken care of. And I remember I was like, I felt broken on that one. The system failed in a country where we have more medical access and care than anywhere else in the world. That, to me, that I should not have died. It was like we were practicing third world medicine.
Yeah.
And he was another person that we just didn't get to fast enough. That if I had seen him even an hour earlier, maybe would have been enough, figured out what was going on. If it was a dissection, get him to vascular surgery or thoracic, whoever, but we didn't. And it really hit me really hard. And I was like, I don't know if I'm coming back. And when I walked into that next shift, because I had to go to work again, I had to talk my way every step into that emergency department
Hmm.
and tell myself, you can do this. You got to just take one step, one patient. And but I had never been that nervous walking into a shift in my life, ever. On a truck or in a hospital, I'd never been that nervous.
Yeah, that's rough, right? I mean, there are quite a few ERs here, but it's still not enough for the volume of patients that we're seeing. So do you think that it was something that was misdiagnosed in triage, or do you think you guys were overrun at the time, you know?
I don't think it was anything missed in triage. I really don't. I think it was his initial presentation wasn't critical, but continued to progress over those 8 or 9 hours, and then trying to ask your emergency department staff to continue to round on patients in the waiting room while also intaking into the triage area and treating them and then rotating them back out is a big ask, and it's not easy. Every hospital has its version of that system. Some work better than others, but 60, 70 people sitting in a waiting room is 60, 70 people sitting in a waiting room. At some point, the span of control is just not there.
Right.
And at
It's
that time, it
daunting. Yeah.
was, yeah, the staff just wasn't there. So what I think really ultimately happened there was is he continued to just get sicker, and then by the time he came back in, he had kind of declared whatever his disease process was, and at that point was just too late. It was that shift that when I walked in, that next shift, um, had another patient who, again, this is nothing dramatic, I didn't intubate him. It wasn't any major procedures. I didn't do anything weird life-saving measures. It was just a simple person with really bad biliary colic or gallbladder pain and had been going on for days. And they didn't have an inflamed gallbladder on ultrasound. Their labs looked good, but this is at a point where this gallbladder needs to come out for this person, right? It's time for it to come out. I happened to get lucky that day that the surgeon who this person was seeing was actually on call. And I called and I said, can we get, I'd like to admit this person. And the surgeon said to me, because the ORs were having the same problems, right? Like
Yeah.
taking days to get people into the surgical suites. And the surgeon says to me, look, um, please admit the patient. I don't care if it takes 3 days for me to get him into the OR. It's going to be a month or two if I do this outpatient.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, done, right? I didn't do anything huge. I just called. But that's where I found for me what keeps me and sustains me is a moment like that, where I've done something and I'm going to make someone's life better in that moment. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be providing them with the medications that they need for alcohol withdrawal and peer support follow up. That we now have this amazing order set in our system that can do that, right? Um, Getting a hold of the surgeon and saying this person needs this and getting them that care that they need, facilitating that process when that person is, and especially at that time when the system was so bad that in that moment the system clicked perfectly into place and that patient got what they needed. And the two things that sustain me, that keep me going, is the balance of working as a medical director and then working in the emergency department. I don't do all of just one.
Sure.
But the ambulance service that I work for is and the crews there is what ultimately is my biggest driving joy and keeps me going. And those moments like that in medicine where, you did something and helped somebody and got them what they needed. And that's what I find that brings me joy and keeps me sustained and happy in what I do. And that when when it's like yeah, I can take another step, I can do another year, I can do another 10. I'm even for all the challenges we're still seeing today, it's like, no, I can keep going, I can keep doing this. And so that's what finally, for me, helped sustain me and keep me going.
Yeah. No, and I'm really sorry that you went through that, but like you were saying, sometimes we just have bad days. And that day you were having a bad day, and whether it was because of the situation or whether it was, any other preceding factors that could have led up into that, or whether it was just the trauma of seeing that event. Not necessarily that it was a traumatic event, but the trauma of that event. You know what I mean? I know that no matter what, you are doing your best because you've always been one who advocates for not just your patients, but for your paramedics and your EMTs and your staff. You know what I mean? And that's something that is really hard to find these days.
Thank you.
Don't let it get you down. It is really hard what we do, and I think a lot of people take advantage of that. They all want to be the heroes, but they forget, just like you said, sometimes we deal with really upset people, or sometimes we're the people that upset those patients, you know what I mean? And that's why you work on an ambulance. You have two people, then that way if, one person's upsetting the patient, the other person can hopefully intervene and help kind of diffuse that situation. But
Yeah.
keep being the advocate you're being, man.
Well, thank you. No, I really appreciate that. There's so much fear in medicine.
There's a lot of fear.
The fear of making a mistake, fear of being yelled at, fear of getting in trouble, fear of losing your license, fear of being, oh, you're not good at what you do, fear of losing what you have built, and then an event happens and you are now liable for that event. The medicine has become very punitive in a lot of ways, and that pushback on that is the just culture process, which I have drank the Kool-Aid on, and I have 100% with. Um, because fear doesn't allow for improvement. Fear doesn't allow for making things better, right? The last thing I want ever is my crews to be afraid of me. When I hear, oh, I'm going to go down to Dr. Fedoro's office, like, I don't want them to feel that way ever. And sometimes we do. We have to talk about cases, but it's a learning moment. It's a moment to improve. It's a moment to get better. Um, because if you don't, if you're afraid to come and talk about it, one, people are going to lie, which isn't good. But like, I can't tell you how many times when I was a kid, I'd break something and then like just barely put it together enough, and then tell my sister, "Hey, go touch that, whatever," and then it breaks. And you're like, "Oh, you're in trouble,"
Oh, you're
right?
a jerk.
You do these things, right? Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So, you know, I mean, she's like, don't tell mom. I was like, all right, well, what are you going to do for me? Like, and I'm the one that did it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, all right. Well, okay, well, we'll play whatever you want to play for like the next hour. Okay, all right. Well, that's fair.
That's fair.
So, total jerk. But yeah, that's the fear of that you're going to get in trouble for something like that. And systems don't improve when that happens, right? If a paramedic is on the streets and they're worried about pressing the sync cardio button, sync cardio over at somebody because they're worried they're going to get yelled at by a nurse in the ED or a doctor or by me, right? Then the practice doesn't happen. That needs to happen in that moment. They need to be free and unencumbered by that fear, right? So that doesn't accomplish anything. And none of us like that feeling from being a
No.
doctor all the way down to, anybody in the healthcare arena itself. It is what leads to worse outcomes, right? So if you create a culture where you are supporting your team, an environment where they know that they can come to you. I wish I got out on the streets more than I do right now, but when, I took the fellows out a couple of days ago for getting to know the system, and instantly, questions. Hey, I had a question about this or that. And that moment, right, that they can come talk to me about that. I share
Yeah.
emails with one of my medics about new bands that we find, right? And I'm careful with, being still respectful of relationships and not trying to cross any lines like that. But still, like, we can have those moments together where we can share stuff like that. And knowing that I'm not, I know this is going to sound weird because I'm talking about myself in third person. I'm not that egotistical, I swear. But like, I'm not just Dr. Maduro. I mean, seriously, Sam, like, I realized one day, like, oh my God, they think of me sometimes. I'm pretty sure because I was up in Durango a year or two ago for the train ride with my kid. And one of my medics saw me. They're like, Dr. Maduro, what are you doing here? I'm like, riding the train like everybody else is. It's the holiday time. Like, then I realized, oh my God, they think of me like I used to think of my teachers when I was in elementary school. Like, they just lived at the school. They didn't have to go grocery shopping or to the bank or or like they lived outside. It's like this weird creature person that lives at the base all day long and just sits in his medical director chair and like, yeah, what am I gonna do next? And it's like, so like, to be a human, right? I'm human. Like, I mean, I know not everyone can see what I'm wearing right now, but I'm wearing my Lamb of God Mastodon shirt right now. I'm a huge metal fan. I love comic books and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and building Legos. I'm still a human being.
Yeah.
And so to impart some of that when I'm talking with them and working with them so that fear is not there and that they feel comfortable to be able to practice, is so important. What kind of medical director do you want to be? What kind of EMS physician do you want to be? You're gonna be the one that everyone's like, oh, I'm gonna get my ass chewed, right? Or are you gonna be the one that stands up for your crews and does the right thing to advocate for them? And when something doesn't go well, that it isn't bad medic, bad EMT. It's, let's talk about this. Let's learn from this. How do we improve and how do we get better so that the next time it happens, you're ready for that challenge, which ultimately means we've taken care of our patients.
Right. I mean, one of my experiences with you was you going to bat with me against an ER doctor that had yelled at me in the ER. And for me, that was huge. Um, I knew I was in the right. I didn't back down. I got that patient into trauma who ultimately ended up having a very large brain bleed and a shift.
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
you had no problem, going over and doing like a case study between the fire department, our crew, and then the hospital as well to ultimately make that a better experience. And I can't even tell you, like, in all my years in EMS, you're probably one of the only providers that's ever done that. And that's huge to have for EMS specifically. It's nice to know that we have people that got our back.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you know what, I'm more than anything else. Thank you that I was there to be able to help you in that moment, right? It's
Yeah.
like that's what I'm there for. And if you walked away with it feeling like I did that, then mission accomplished. I still talk about that case, and why that's important, about advocating for your patients when you see something, and they're that sick, and that patient was sick, and it happens, right? Again, that's I know, because I know now, having been in that resus bay, how fast and overwhelming it can get, right? And so sometimes we do a quick one view of them, and like, no, they look good, we'll move them out. That isn't necessary. That's because there's five others that are coming in the next 3 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we need to do that evaluation with as well. And 100% that's going to get missed, right? And one of the things that I try to cue in is I'll say to the crew, I'm like, are you good with this? Right? Oh, yeah, yeah, we're okay. But if, it's try to remember, like with your case, if it was someone, or if you came in again with that if you said, I'm really worried about this patient, that I need to cue into that. You saw something or heard something because you were with the patient way longer than I've been here 30 seconds.
Yeah.
You've been with the patient for like the last 10, 15 minutes. You saw the scene, you've got the context, and you have that critical assessment. And that's why I also tell the crews all the time, like, don't get lazy with your OP cure STU, with your history. The history drives so much of what you do. Like, if you hadn't done that patient would have gone to a cube and probably would not have survived that event, right?
Yeah.
So paying close attention to that when they go, well, they don't listen to me, right? And then, so why should I try? Well, because it isn't about who's listening to you. It's about you taking care of the patient every single time, right? I mean, we had a case with a patient one time, older guy was complaining of shoulder pain. And I was like, there's something doesn't sound right about this one, right? And did a 12 lead on the guy and winds up popping a STEMI, right? This is a case that if you go like, oh, another shoulder pain, right? We're gonna go to another 26 alpha, right? Well, there's a lot going on in those cases, right? What is really going on in that moment? And so one of the things that and look, I do this too. To say that I sometimes, you read something and you go, oh God, what am I walking into now?
Yeah.
Is natural, right? Am I lying if I said we don't all do that at some point?
No, you're
Right.
not lying.
So what are you going to do mentally though to fix that? In that moment, what do? Right? When you feel yourself like already kind of pigeonholing, closing doors on something, because maybe you just read a triage note or you just got the dispatch and you're already like, it's gonna be another one of those. What are you gonna do in that moment? I know what I do.
What do you do?
And I've saved my butt, oh my God, so many times. When I feel that coming up, and I'm like, oh God, this is gonna be another BS excuse or complaint. Hold on, stop, be kind, be gentle, be helpful, reset, be kind, be gentle, be helpful, sit down and listen. Hi, I'm Dr. Maduro. What's going on today? How can I help you? Tell me the story about why you're here. Just starting there. Be kind, be gentle, be helpful. And when you start thinking that way, it opens you up to listen. And you'd be amazed what you'll catch when you listen. Because now I actually know why the patient is here. And it's not what the triage note actually says, because we know that happens all the time. It's not triage, it's not the tech, it's not the nurse. the story will change 10 times by the time you get into the room. I still remember that when I was in residency. I go to tell the my attending, oh, they're here for abdominal pain, and they come out, they're like, they told me they're here for a headache. You're like, I swear that's not right. It's just it is will forever be emergency medicine.
Yeah.
That the story changes 5 times by the time I get to them, and I no judgment, man, no judgment, because I know, been there. But when you feel that, because it's natural, right? You get so many patients coming in, and it's so many complaints, and you're trying to figure out who is sick and who's not, right? Um, and really, because it's not that you don't want to take care of them, it's just I'm trying to figure out, is this person in a really serious life-threatening emergency or not? Oftentimes they aren't, but you still need to take care of them, right? Is take that breath and take that moment. And when you do that, actually listen. It's amazing what you find out. And it's helped me a lot in moments where I may have missed something if I hadn't taken that moment and said, be kind, be gentle, be helpful, right? So in your moment, in that case, listening to you, but also for you in that moment when somebody maybe isn't listening, or the receiving team is being a little rude, right? That's never happened before.
Yeah.
Receiving ED team is being rude to the paramedic. Well, why is that? Because you're bringing them more work, right? In an already overtaxed moment, right? It's not that they don't really want to help. It's like, oh, again, again, again. And be kind and be gentle, be helpful on the other side of it, because then you're going to calm down and not react to the person who you can see is having a bad day as well, right?
Sure.
I don't have a single tattoo, because for me, I've never been able to find anything that I wanted that meant that much to put it on, right? I
Hmm.
probably got myself twisted up about it, but that phrase I've actually seriously thought about putting on somewhere at some point, because it is the mantra that I try to live by. Some days I fail, and that's when, everybody knows it. But when I get it right is when it's just hopefully a kind and gentle experience.
Sure. No, that's a great mantra to have. I was actually talking with a friend yesterday, and she was explaining, we were actually talking about that story, and she went on to talk about a different story about how, sometimes things are getting missed. And what she described is when you have somebody who's coming in handcuffs and they're screaming their head off. You know what I mean? What is that
Mm-hmm.
one person doing to the whole ER? They're triggering
Oh
us, right?
yeah.
Because we are triggered because we have so much trauma. And that makes sense from a hospital perspective, even from a pre-hospital. But if you think about it, anytime the ambulance walks into an ER, we are triggering that staff, right? Because this
Mm-hmm.
means that there's potentially another like super sick person or another very traumatic event or another code. Like, so thinking about it like that makes more sense, right? And then that gives me the ability to put myself in that provider's shoes at that time. We just walked into EDRU, we just triggered this person.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you're thinking about that. And in that moment of, giving them that grace, and in that moment as well. And that screaming that everybody wants to stop immediately, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just so draining on the soul,
Yes.
like hours of it, and you're just like, this isn't even the sickest person I have, but it's the person that I have that's taking up the most resources, and it can get so frustrating so quick. But I can tell you, that's also the patient that when your brain is starting to be like, I can't take this anymore, also just give yourself an extra moment to say, am I missing anything here?
Yeah.
The prisoner population, your homeless population, your drug overdose population, in particular, the meth abusers that come in that are, at that extreme state of delirium, and it is hard to deal with, right? But give yourself a moment to be like, I'm going to actually order that extra lab, or I'm going to order that extra test, because this is where stuff gets missed.
Yeah.
And to say for a moment, like I still remember I had a gentleman come in on Thanksgiving. This is a perfect example. Perfect example. Guy comes in Thanksgiving into the waiting room, and he just keeps walking in over and over and over again, right? Um, and he's just watching the television. He's watching the game on the TV, right? And triage nurse is done with this guy, right? They have thrown him out like 5 times already, right? Security has thrown him out 5 times because he's not registering. He's not saying he has any complaints. He's just sitting there and watching the game and hanging out inside, right? So it's November in Albuquerque. It's cool to cold at this point. You know what it's like here, and finally, I think someone said, look, man, either you got to have a complaint or you got to get out, right? Not exactly the right terminology to use because, of course, and what does he say? He goes, well, I'm feeling short of breath, right? So think about now all of this, right? All of this is building up to preconceived notions of what's going on with this patient. And already now I'm like, because then the triage nurse comes up and, oh no, charge is like, oh man, can you go see this patient like and get him out of here? Like he came in, he's been in and out of the waiting room all day, he hasn't had anything, and now all of a sudden he's complaining of shortness of breath, right? So where do you think my mind is? Right. Oh, all right.
Yeah. This
Okay.
bullshit. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, again, look, there are some doctors out there who would be like, who have a much different mindset, would be like, well, let's make sure and let's take care. And I appreciate them more than you realize because I can't say that I'm that person. I
Yeah.
really can't. But I'm also being honest about that because if I'm honest with my shortcomings with it and I recognize when I'm having that, then I know also what to do to control myself from doing that and not trying to make that mistake, right? Um, because I said exactly you like, oh man, this is bullshit. But in the back of my mind, I'm still thinking, all right, but you still got to go see him and see if there's really anything going on, right? So I walk in to see him, and he's just a little bit tachypnic, right? He's just a little bit hypoxic. He's just a little bit tachycardic. And I'm like, there's something going on with this guy. I know he'd been bouncing in and out all day, but finally he said something and it was legit, right? So if I had just like, nah, man, like, he's fine, blah, 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 I did my quick eval discharge, right?
Yeah.
It was either a massive PE or a really bad pneumonia. I think it was a PE. I'll be honest with you, I've kind of forgotten exactly what the diagnosis was. But it was like he was legit sick. He was
Yeah.
legit sick and absolutely needed to be admitted, right? So that's what I'm talking about, right? The guy that's screaming, that's totally, zonked out on, polypharmacy overdose or you know, drank a ton of booze or whatever it is, or all that in that moment, it can be very easy to get stuck in that and take a moment and say, all right, am I missing anything? Set that aside for a moment and say, what else is going on here, right?
Yeah.
Um, because that's when you're truly being good at whatever it is that you're doing. Nursing, paramedicine, physician, doesn't matter what area it is when you can see through that veil of that intense moment and say, I still need to figure out if something's going on with this patient. And it's okay to take a couple of extra minutes and order the lab or the imaging that you think might need to be done because you see something there. Trust your gut. If you see something, work it up. Don't be afraid to do it. And if it just happened to be they're tachycardic because they're dehydrated, then the fluids you gave them are going to make them better, or whatever. So it's something that I admit to my faults as a human being very freely, and at times, someone might say, "Oh, he's not a good doctor as a result of that." Okay, that's fine. But I think by knowing that, um, I do sometimes think that way, and then I can go through a mental exercise to make sure that I stay in the right mindset, is then how I can still be frustrated with a moment, but then still advocate and do the right thing for the patient when I need to.
Which makes sense.
It's not easy.
Yeah, because like you said, we all do get frustrated, but being able to take that step back and just provide the best care that you can in that moment is all we can do. You know what I mean? And like you said, like not everybody's perfect, which is fine. Just get past it and move on. That's the ultimate goal. Just do what you're here to do. That's what you get paid for. This is what you chose to do. do it how you want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, is there anything in the ER or on the streets that has ever made you feel like squeamish?
Hmm.
I can tell you that like broken fingers and anything to do with eyeballs usually get me going.
Okay, teeth.
Oh, teeth is a good one.
Oh God, teeth. Like I still remember I was in residency. We actually had a dental rotation and this guy had a cracked tooth and they had numbed him up so he didn't feel anything, but they go to pull the tooth and the tooth had cracked. And so now the dentist is like grabbing a hold of this tooth and like pulling out with these pieces. Oh my God, I got so nauseous and I turned green because I remember he looked at me and goes, "Are you gonna be all right?" And I was like, "I think I'm gonna puke." And he's like, "Why don't you sit down?" I mean, look, I've seen plenty of poo, I've seen plenty of vomit, and it's like that's gross, but that one really teeth like that that whole process, anything taking them out, ugh, I can't do. Um, trach mucus.
Oh yeah,
Ugh,
that one's a lung butter. Yeah, that one's pretty
oh,
gross.
roaches. I can deal with lice and I can deal with scabies and I can deal with even maggots relatively well, but like roaches coming out of people's clothes. Oh God, I'm like oh just roaches. Oof. If a spider crawls across me at home, I'll be like, oh, that's a spider, and I'll flick it off. But if a roach comes near me, I am emptying the can on it. Okay. There is no live and let live. I'm going to keep spraying until it's light and it's like nothing left, Oh, yeah.
That's so
And when they come
funny.
out of people's clothing, oh, I can't.
Yeah, dude. I think any bugs on clothing, like bed bugs, I think are probably one of my least favorite things. Bed bugs are so freaking gross. But I can like even maggots are fine. Usually maggots are good because it means that they're cleaning the site, right? So it's not a bad thing.
It's just weird when you see tissue moving like that. You're like, it's not supposed to writhe and wriggle like that.
Yeah, so there's a video going around with a guy who has maggots in his gums, in the back part of his gums. That one plays rent free, and I hate that one. It's nasty. It's just one of those things you can't get out of your head.
Yeah, you know what? I am not looking that one up after we're done. I'm
Yeah,
actually going
don't.
to hold off. And don't send it to me either. Don't be a jerk.
We'll
Next thing I
see.
know, like I get message from Sam. What's this? God.
But then you have to go show it to everybody else, you know?
Agreed. I'll send it to do you remember Dave Chapek? He's like one of
Oh
my
yeah.
best friends ever. I'll send it to him just to be like, if I have to know about it now, you got to know about it, buddy. So
I'm sharing them, passing this along. That's funny. Do you have any like favorite stories? Like what's the craziest thing you've ever gotten to see or do in your time?
I have to think about that one for a moment.
So like one of my favorite stories to tell is I had a set of rooms and we had a gentleman who came in from the prison who he would self-cath. I don't remember why he was self-cathing, but he would self-cath and instead of taking the catheters out, he would just push them all the way up his urethra into his bladder. And he was known for doing this. So he would do that to get out of the prison to come into the hospital and hang out in a hospital room for a couple hours. So the urologist came down and they have this really cool little like roto rooter machine that goes up the urethra and it gets into the bladder. It has this little claw thing that comes out and you can grab whatever's in the bladder and you can pull it out of the urethra. So he actually let me a couple of times get to go in and actually control it and pull pull the catheters out of the urethra, and that was like the coolest thing ever. The ultimate claw machine.
that is really cool. I don't know. I think that one is. I've got I've got to do some pretty cool stuff over the years. I think most of it has been just like in the beginning of it when you get to do it was really the fun part. Like I still remember when I was in residency, the anesthesiologist, I told him, he knew had been a paramedic, so he's like, I'm going to teach you. He goes, you know the Mac, but you don't know the Miller, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to teach you really how to how to, use the Miller blade. And to me, that was like the best because now that's actually one of my favorite things is when I was in residency is we get ready to intubate somebody and they'd say, okay, what blade do you want? And he made me a Miller man. And so I'd say, I want a Miller. And every time the best part was seeing my attendant kind of go, and then they'd say, you want what? I say, a Miller 3. And they're like, are you
Yep.
sure? Like he's not gonna use. I was like, yeah, I'll use a Miller, right? And then I get that tube on the first time and see them. Oh, I guess he knows what he's doing after all. I was like, yeah, I learned on that one. That was always really cool, But yeah, just kind of thinking about some of the stuff through trauma over the years. Getting to go in and help on trauma cases, on really critical trauma cases. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't a fun case. This is probably one of the most brutal cases. Brutal is the right word. Just horribly painful cases I had ever seen. Unfortunately, when I was in residency, and this is not this case wound up in the news, so I'm not saying anything that wasn't known about. Unfortunately, this college girl, woman, she basically doused a blanket in gasoline and lit herself on fire. And so she was burned absolutely beyond what I could ever imagine seeing. And this was the worst burn I've ever seen in my life. To this day, I've never seen anything quite like this. And seeing an escharotomy done and helping with that, like cutting through skin in like literally like shoe leather, was something that was a pretty interesting experience to see. So, again, horrible case, but that was something that you don't get a chance to do very often.
No, yeah.
But that was just one of those where I was like, that was an interesting experience with that.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Did they perform the escharotomy on all the extremities or just on like the lower half or
No, this was chest, abdomen, because at that point the circumferential burns are basically causing so much compression. So there's ways that you do kind of like lateral chest and lateral abdomen, and then on the arms and the legs as well, so that you can actually release all that pressure. And it was cool because it worked. Like her pressures came up and the rest of it. And at the time at Hartford, we were not a burn center, so we had to transfer her down to Bridgeport. But and obviously, did not survive this event.
yeah.
But that was something that was an interesting learning experience. One of the fastest, and this is just kind of, it was really not that I did it, but to this day, the fastest central line I've ever seen put in was by Mandy. We had a patient, again, we're at Hartford, and I'm getting sign out from one of my colleagues' residents, and this guy had a previous like air duct dissection repair, and it ruptured again, and so this guy coded on us like dropped, right? And I go into instant medic intubation mode, right? Like I can tube anywhere, man, anywhere. I'm in this tight, cramped room. There's no space. The bed's too low. I'm like leaning over the bed, and like and I go and I'm tubing him, and as I'm going to intubate, she walks in, right? And she goes, "Do you need a central line?" Right? And it's just like this was so cool. It was the Ian Mandy show, right? Like we're working this together. And like even the attendings that were there, like kind of backing up out of the way. And I'm like, I got the tube. Can you get the line? She's like, I'm on it, right? So I go in, I intubate him, and I hear her go, I'm in, right? That's the fastest central line to this day I have ever seen anybody do.
That's really cool.
Oh, and then another really cool one was we had a overdose patient who was also a hypothermic cardiac arrest that was bananas of a case. And the cool thing about that one was um, I worked that case with Dr. Daryl Macias.
Oh, I love
And I don't know if you
Messias.
know Dr.
He's
Yeah.
already been on an
He was,
episode, brother.
oh, has he?
Uh-huh.
All right, that one I got to go back and find because so he was my first 911 medical director. That's how long I've known him, right?
That's
So just,
awesome.
appreciation of time and experience. I still remember I'm an EMT intermediate. And when he goes, "Can I go on this call with you?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Right. And he wrote in with me on this call, right? Flash forward 20 plus years later, and now we're working this code together, both as doctors, with my first medical director. Like, how amazing is this moment, right? And this was a crazy case. This was probably one of the coolest ones I've ever seen. Hypothermic, like we're watching on transesophageal echogram, literally no movement of the heart. The blood is just swirling in the ventricle, doing nothing, right? And she's still moving, like her hands are moving, her head's moving. You wouldn't be moving otherwise. This was crazy,
That
right?
is crazy.
ECMO team comes down and they cath her. Meanwhile, Dr. Macias is like putting warm bags of water on her. We've got, we're trying to do this, through core warming on her. And and then the ECMO team comes down. They cannulate this patient. And within like 20 minutes of her being on pump, she's up trying to get off the bed.
Jeez.
It was so cool. I mean, I even tried to get this as like a case like at the NAMSP conference to review. It was just an amazing, awesome case. That one is still one of the coolest ones I've ever been on, right? And patients in hypothermic cardiac arrest do really well with ECMO.
Yeah.
Mandy has been on one where one particular patient has been put on ECMO twice from hypothermic cardiac arrest,
Jeez, that's nuts.
and actually, and then both times like left the hospital. So yeah,
That's cool. I don't know if that's bad luck or good luck.
just the ECMO process works really well and with slowing down, right?
Yep.
But yeah, that case was an awesome case. To this day, I was like, that was just so cool to be a part of. So yeah,
That's
and then I
awesome.
got to do it with Dr. Massey.
Yeah. Icing on the top there. That's pretty awesome. I love Dr. Macias. Well, Ian, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about anything that you feel that we haven't talked about, or if you want to shout anybody out. Now's your time to shine.
Sure. So one, I've been in, I know a lot of people here. I grew up in the system here. I came back to work in the system here. There's so many people that, have been a part of my life and, helped me grow up in the system, that trained me or, worked with me. But it's hard because there's a ton of people I want to say, but then I might miss somebody, and I don't want to, I don't want to do that. But honestly, just to start with, everybody on the leadership team that I work with at the ambulance service that I'm at, I love them all to death. I think we've got the best. I am a little biased, but I think I got the best job of anybody here in the state of New Mexico. I really, I love the team that I work with. I really do. They're just, everybody cares. Everybody really, really cares. And that's the part of it that sometimes I know doesn't always get transmitted as well as we'd like it to, that message of what we're doing. But I sit in those meetings with them and I watch them and talking about how do we make this better for the crews on the street? How do we ease the burden on them? How do we make the job, sustainable for them? And even just something as simple as how do we make it not as hot for them in the trucks and things like that, that every single one of them came up in this service. Every single one of them, it gives their life to this program, and I love our leadership team. I really do. It's an honor and a pleasure to work with them. My QI guy, Zach Potts, God, he is one of the smartest young men I've ever met in my life. He's going to continue to do amazing things in this world. It's such an honor and pleasure to get to work with him. Our entire education team in our organization, it's hard, right? There's a bunch of people that all of them. I mean, our logistics crew. I mean, how cool is it that we have an entire logistics team
Yeah, it's pretty
at our
cool.
service that puts in all that work to make sure, it's really just, I love where I work, and it would take, I don't know if I'll ever, I mean, I'm happy where I am, and I don't think I'm ever going to go anywhere else. It would take a lot to get me to move from where I am, because and even in every EMT and paramedic, like sometimes when people leave, I'm like, it hurts a little
Yeah.
because I feel like I'm losing somebody personally, and I know it's
Yeah.
not me or necessarily. Sometimes, people are going to medical school or PA school, or they've gone to nursing school, or, what are those things? And it's like I feel like I'm losing a family member when they go, and it's really been amazing. Everyone at the EMS consortium has been wonderful to me over the years as well. They wear one uniform, I wear the other, but we're all one big team,
Mm-hmm.
and I love working with them as well. That I still get to be a part of the fellowship is I love doing that, and I love having fun with that. And so, yeah. The other thing is, we still need to work on how we keep EMS sustainable. How do we keep emergency medicine sustainable? Because the same things I see that are burning out paramedics and EMTs, burning out the nurses, and burning out the doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And I see an EM physician who's got barely 5 years in, and they're already like, I can't do this for 30 years like this, right? How do you create a more sustainable way to do it? It isn't that they don't love what they're doing. It's the same with the nurses and the paramedics. They love what they do, but when it's the same volume and it's the same pressure day after day after day, it gets very easy to really like get tired from it. And the
Yeah.
schedule being as erratic as it is, because it's 24/7, 24
Yep.
7, 365. You work a couple of evenings and then you go into nights, you get a day off, and then you're back on to days. In the emergency department, it's hard, and people, I see my younger colleagues coming out, and I'll be amazed if they make 10 years, right? But is that any different than the nurses?
No.
Is it any different than the paramedics?
No.
But for EMS, how do we make, EMS was a career. And what I see now is a lot of it being a stepping stone to other things. And that hurts, I mean, look, I got my bachelor's of science in EMS, and I became a physician. Yeah, but and I also still have my EMT basic license. So it is MD/EMTP, or I'm sorry, B.
That's
So
funny.
I'm sure Shelby will be very happy that I said that if she listens to this. So, because she's always the first to be like, don't forget EMTB, and I'm like, I know, God, I'm in my research year this year, trying to get all my CEs together for that as well. Yeah, for both my physician license or my EM certification and my EMTB cert, I'm doing both this year. So anyway,
Ugh.
point of it is how do we make this right sustainable? Like, we've got like the concept of job shares, right? Like one of the things that keeps me going is I have different jobs, right? I
Yeah.
get to do a little of both. And when I get a little tired of one, then I get to go back to the other. And there's that yin and yang, that back and forth of that, where I'm not completely immersed in just one all the time. So there's days where, being a medical director, I'm like, I'm done with this. And when I go to the emergency department, I get to just be a doctor. And I get to just take care of patients and just enjoy the moment of not having to worry about whatever system issue is going on, or QI problem, or this or that, or supply issue or whatever. But on the other side is days where it's like I'm done in the emergency department. I'm like, man, I can't wait to go back to, go work in an ambulance for the day, and being really happy with that. So how do we build that though? Because I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I agree.
We can talk about salary and benefits. That's always a struggle. But how do we make the job sustainable for people where they want to be there for years to come? And I think it's one of the biggest things we're facing.
I agree 100%. I don't think that the way that we are handling our systems right now is sustainable at all. So like you said, it is a stepping stone. And to kind of use a separate example, working as a flight paramedic with a dual pilot program, we have our primary in charge captains and then our secondary in charge captains, so our PICs and our SICs. And coming from a company previous to this one, the SICs were just treated so badly because the expectation was, well, they're going to come in, they're going to get their hours, and they're going to leave. Why is it okay to treat them like that when you can convince even a quarter of these people that come through our system and our program to stay and have good, high quality trained PICs? It's the same with EMTs and paramedics. They're coming in to get their hours as an EMT or as a paramedic to do, again, go on as a nurse, as a doctor, as a whatever, firefighter. If we treated our people better, if we had more options for them, then we would be losing less people. And the idea is always going to be it's greener on the other side, but it is indeed not always greener on the other side.
One of my favorite lines ever on that is an old song from Soundgarden. And the line is, the grass is always greener where the dogs are shitting. And it absolutely makes sense, right? It's like, well, what
Yes.
else is in there? Yeah. Why is the grass so green on the other side that you think you're seeing, right? Careful what you wish for. You just might get it.
Yeah.
Now, I agree, and it's interesting because I see it from the perspective of being in leadership for the ambulance service, but then being on the other side of it as a line doc in the emergency department where I'm not leadership in that respect. I'm just like every other emergency medicine physician. And it's this weird kind of double vision at times where
Yeah.
I can see on both sides, right? But what I also see is how much people like, you know, at least in our organization, how much they're really trying to make that a sustainable, from the little things of the actual environment that you're in, but then how do you grow and continue to develop pipeline that for also future leadership, right? Like even if someone leaves our organization, but say they come back into the mothership of the hospital system and now they're doing, some kind of hospital leadership position or IT, like we don't want those people to go at all, right?
Yeah.
Or they go to school and they become a PA or an MD, and there is a lot of people like that who started with our ambulance service and are now working back at the exact same hospital system now as a physician or a PA, which is a really cool thing. I mean, yes, they're not working with us anymore, but that's okay. I mean, they're
That's
still
okay.
there and they're
Yeah.
still in the system being a part of that and helping. And yeah, some of it is sometimes in some situations bad management. Other times, but a lot of times what I think what we really see is, at least I feel like with our organization more so than anything else, is the constraints financially, and broadening out programs to be able to do those things but still balance it so that we're not in the red that then we can't do it at all, right? So
Yeah.
that's that crazy side of things like that. But it's even the little things of making sure that people, when their suggestions are put in and how do we work with stuff like that. I just there's a lot there. Again, I'm a little biased. I think on our side we're trying really hard for that, but there has to be also more national sustainable process with this as well, because this isn't just Albuquerque, right? I
It is
mean,
not.
this is across the country. So, this is a systemic issue that has to be addressed at larger levels of this, and someone eventually saying, this has to be a focus somewhere in, God, I don't know who, right? But it has to be a larger focus of how we keep this going, because if we don't, we're not even talking about in here in large urban areas. What do you for all these rural areas with volunteers? That is what makes up a huge section of this. But if this isn't sustainable in the cities where people are getting paid for it and in career level jobs with this, what do you do in a rural area where the only reason why people are there, they're doing this because out of the love of it and they're out of their heart, for their community,
Yeah.
and that's not sustainable. Like because somebody in a town of 5,000 people deserves to be taken care of just the same as somebody who lives in a town of 500.
Yeah. I agree 100%. Let me know when you're ready to start pursuing that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, we do. I'm also in the local NAMSP chapter here for the state of New Mexico, and it's been an interesting couple of years building that as well. But we have done a small amount of political advocacy to help with some of those things. In
That's
fact,
awesome.
I'm happy to say we were actually a part of look, we didn't get this completely passed, but we put in we went to last year, or this year, on Capitol Hill in Santa Fe for the additional funding for the EMS fund. So they changed how that funding happens now, and it's actually coming off of I thought it was the luxuries tax. I can't remember exactly, but instead of it being a fixed amount, it is actually a proportion of a certain tax in the
Mm.
state of New Mexico that is actually will not only provide a much higher amount of funding into the system, but it also automatically adjusts as that tax adjusts with inflation over the years,
Wow.
which was amazing. So like we were there, a bunch of fire departments were there, unions were there, hospitals were there. But NAMSP New Mexico chapter was the EMS physician cohort that also testified for that bill to be passed. And it did, and it's now in place. And there's a significantly higher amount of funding coming out of the EMS Act as a result of that. So I'm happy to say we were a small part of that, but we were part of it nonetheless. So
Yeah. No, it's awesome what people can do when they come together as a team.
yeah,
All right, Ian. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming out today to the 911 Nonsense podcast. It's been amazing. I've had a great time catching up with you. It's been a few years. Great conversations today. I really, really appreciate you coming on.
absolutely. It was an honor, and I really appreciate hanging out with you. It's nice seeing you again as well. As you can see, I'm a talker.
That's all right, dude.
So if you ever want to do this again, I'm happy to be a part of it. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. This is important. The work you're doing is important. So keep doing it. This helps lend to the voice of emergency medicine, pre-hospital medicine, but in a way that is more than just talking about. It isn't just about the empirical data, right? I mean, I can listen
Yeah.
to MRAP all day long. That's no big, or whatever other podcast for that. This is talking about part of this that's the human side of it,
Hmm.
and how we express our joy in medicine, and the moral injury that we have in medicine. And so keep doing this, because this is important work, and it gets a lot of voices out there and being seen in a way that is just as important as the actual practice of medicine itself. So thank you, and thank you for letting me be a part of it, Sam. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I super appreciate that, and it sounds like I'm doing what I need to be doing, and I'll keep on plugging.
There you go. Good.
You have a good day, brother. We'll talk soon.
All right, take care.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show and want to show your support, be sure to check out the Noon merch store on Bonfire. Find the link in the description below. Also, if you have any guest suggestions, or if you're interested in being a guest on Noon yourself, visit the website at www.samspursuit.com to get in touch.